Hello, friends and listeners. Welcome to Truth, Lies, and Alibis, the true crime podcast from three friends sharing their perspectives from having years of 911 dispatching experience.
Episode 12, America's First Serial Killer. In this episode, we begin our discussion on H.H. Holmes, America's First Serial Killer.
This week, it's going to be me, Jess, telling the story. So my question to get us started with is, have you ever unintentionally learned of a non-fictional crime or criminal through a sensational fictional media? And that's just a fancy way of saying, have you ever learned of something true by watching something fake?
The first thing that comes to mind for me is like American Horror Story, because they based that whole first season.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about the rest of the other seasons. They're probably based off of some true stuff too. But the first season, there was a couple like serial killer kind of things, like the one where he killed the nurses. And so that's what I think of. Yeah, I don't know. I can't think of anything else that, maybe Law and Order SVU, because they base a lot of their crimes on true things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
I think for me, not in the true crime realm, because like I feel like in anything like true crime realm, you're gonna be like, oh, that reminds me of this, or that was based off of this. But definitely in like the supernatural realm, where like I have watched like a scary movie or horror movie and been like, oh, that's totally like just crap, and then learned like, not at the end when they say like based on a real story, but like learned like way later on that, oh, like that was actually, like, even though they didn't give credit to it, like that was actually based on these events that happened. I wish I could think of one off the top of my head, but I know there's been multiple times where I was like, no, that didn't happen. That's terrifying. And like being like, yeah, I can never watch that again, or having to like read into it and look into it because it seemed like it wouldn't be a real scary story, or it was too scary. But yeah, I just think it's really, I think on that supernatural realm, I think I've had more of those experiences of being like, that was based on like true events, or that was based on somebody's like experience. Like there's no way. But I think with true crime, I've always gone into it like, oh, that's got to be based on like this or that.
See, my thing is I can do true crime all day long. I can watch it all day long. I can go to sleep with Dateline on. But when you make me watch a like movie based on some ghost encounter, I'm like, oh, I can't do it. I don't want to do it.
So backwards.
I'm not saying I'm courageous and brave when it comes to.
Oh, you are. In my book, you are.
No, because if we go watch a scary movie, you better know that we are going to have the lights on all night. We are watching Disney all night, and you are sleeping next to me. Like there's no if and or but or
we're
in between.
We're gonna have nothing
That's
but
what's
happiness
happening
for the rest of the night.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Well, it is funny that, Kylee, you use the term supernatural, because that's where my answer comes in. Is so the show Supernatural, I've mentioned before, I was a huge fan of. And long time ago, back in season 2, there's this episode called No Exit. And if you're familiar with the show, it follows two brothers who travel across the country solving supernatural crimes. In this particular episode, Sam and Dean are following up on reports of brutal murders happening to young women at an apartment complex. And they find out that it's not some sort of demon or something like that that's behind it. It's a ghost. And it's the ghost of H.H. Holmes. And at the time, I didn't think anything of it. Again, this is my first real big step into true crime anyway. And I think it was a couple years later, probably a convention that I went to or something like that, when I realized that H.H. Holmes was a real guy. And, it kind of got me interested in that. And I kind of got more information about like where this ghost H.H. Holmes, where that information came from. And so that was pretty interesting. So that's the story for today. So it's going to be a little bit of a history lesson because we're going to be talking about H.H. Holmes, who is considered America's first serial killer.
I'm excited. I've never heard this story, which is weird since, I've been into true crime for a long time.
Well, I'll tell you right now, get ready, because this is a ride. It starts off nice and calm, and then you'll see. We'll get there. It is quite a ride. So
bring it, Jess. Bring it.
On May 16th, 1861, Herman Webster Mudgett was born in Gilmanton, New Hampshire. His parents were Levi and Theodate, and they provided a comfortable life for all 5 of their children. Herman was the middle of those 5. Most reports claim that his father had a strict disciplinary style guided by religious beliefs. However, that's not always supported across the board, and we're going to come across that in a couple of instances. Most believed that it was a pretty normal upbringing. His parents worked hard, did what they could to support the family while also, going to church on the weekends. Levi worked as a farmhand and even took up trade work for extra money to support his family, while Theodate stayed home to raise their 5 children. Herman was extremely intelligent and excelled in school. He was studious and dedicated and spent his time at school alone, which led him to be bullied regularly. Many neighbors noted how he would often go out into the woods by himself and seemed to prefer his solitude. Because Gilmanton was a small town, it seemed as though he could never get away from his tormentors. One particular event stuck with Herman all the way to adulthood. Herman was rumored to have a fear of the anatomy skeleton in a local doctor's office. His bullies somehow found out about his fear and one day forced him into the office with the skeleton, locked him inside, and had previously arranged the skeleton to have his arms, out, reaching.
Ugh.
Herman was locked in the office until workers heard him yelling for help, and it was then that he was released from the office.
Sad.
This event, though, gave his bullies an immediate laugh, changed Herman in an unsuspected way. Herman later said that the incident cured him of his fear and kick-started his fascination in human anatomy and death and his curiosity in medicine.
Oh God, here we go.
Or his curiosity in murder.
So, still staying with his studies, Herman graduates school at 16, leaving Gilmanton and accepting various teaching jobs in nearby cities immediately after. While teaching, Herman
Wait. He was teaching at 16?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, continue on.
While teaching, Herman spent some time as an apprentice for an upcoming medical professional, Dr. Naaman Wright. Dr. Wright was a known advocate for human dissection for the purpose of learning. And this Dr. Wright is actually the same doctor whose office it was that Herman was locked in with the anatomy skeleton. During this time, Herman also met a young woman named Clara Loverline. And less than a year later, Herman and Clara married and moved to Vermont.
Oh, I already feel like Clara should have ran.
Yeah.
Herman enrolled at the College of Vermont, but left only after 1 year in the program. Herman stated he was dissatisfied with the school and it did not meet his expectations. Herman and Clara moved from Vermont so that he could attend the University of Michigan. The school was known for its focus in medicine and science, and Herman was drawn not only by the reputation, but also because the college was the home of the country's first university-owned hospital. Herman studied at the school, meanwhile worked at the hospital with a Professor Herdman, who was the chief anatomy instructor. Herman perfects his talents and is even praised for developing excellent dissection techniques and being devoted to dismemberment.
Dismemberment.
What are you doing on your spare time there, Herman?
Dismembering
bodies.
Just dismembering
Dissecting bodies, that's all.
Wonder if that's on his dating profile.
Totally normal.
This work desensitized Herman to death and gruesome sights. It became a way for him to practice his desires in a socially acceptable way. His environment fueled his fantasies and gave him the proficiencies needed in chemistry and anatomy.
Socially acceptable, huh?
They were taught that at the school. It wasn't weird for him to dissect a human being when it was part of his class.
I mean, I guess that's true. They do that to cadavers.
During his time in medical school, Herman developed a newer skill, the art of manipulation. He began running insurance scams using the cadavers he had access to with the school and the hospital. He would open policies under an alias, with himself as the beneficiary, and then later collected on the claims using random bodies as proof of death. He used this scam many times as a way to support his meager income. Herman's home life was less fulfilling than his school life. He and Clara did not have a lot of money and lived in a shared household. In 1880, while in college, 2 years after getting married, they had their son Robert, which, instead of helping the family come together, created more financial and emotional stress. It later came out that it was worse than the emotional stress and financial troubles. Roommates of the couple said Herman was condescending, demanding, and mean, even physically violent with Clara. In 1884, Clara takes Robert and moves back to New Hampshire.
Good.
Even through all this, Herman ends up doing what very little serial killers have ever accomplished, and he graduates medical school. After graduating, Herman travels across the Midwest. For the next 2 years, he sometimes works as a teacher, a clerk, asylum attendant, or doctor. He perfects his charm and charisma, continuously running scams and establishing his life of crime. Herman came to realize that his conning was not a sustainable way of life. He had to continuously uproot his life before creditors or authorities could discover him. 1885, Moores Folks, New York, is the location of Herman's possible first victim. A young boy went missing from the town, and citizens had seen the boy with Herman earlier that same day. Rumors began to spread, and even the police were involved. Herman stated that the boy had left to return to his family in Massachusetts, and due to there being no body or evidence, the investigation was soon dropped. Just days after the investigation was dropped by police, Herman leaves for another city.
Of course he does.
And this boy apparently was like kind of an urchin, so he was a street boy. People were familiar with him. They saw Holmes with him, and then the day he went missing, multiple people had said that they had seen him with Herman earlier in the day.
That's interesting.
Interesting.
Yes. A year later, in 1886, Herman is associated with another strange occurrence. He is working for a well-known pharmacy with a long-term glowing reputation. But not long after employing Herman, a young man died from a medicine given to him from the store. Many people are convinced that Herman was involved. He, of course, denied it and left town quickly.
I was going to say, did he move after that, too?
He sure did.
He sure likes to run away.
Yes. This is about the time that Herman Webster Mudgett, now accused of involvement in 2 strange situations in less than 1 year, decides he would now be known as Henry Ford Holmes, or H.H. Holmes, leaving behind any bad reputations or old acquaintances.
And his child, I'm guessing? I mean, I know she moved, but he's just like, okay, bye.
So this was long after she moved.
Long after she left? Okay.
Yeah, so she went back to New Hampshire in 84, and this was in 86.
Okay.
So he was on his own for 2 years, and then decides to, because of all the trouble he's been getting into, change his name. Holmes decides to take a smarter approach to his conning and ends up in Chicago. At this time, Chicago is still rebuilding from the fire of 1871, leading to a boom of real estate and job openings to fill. Holmes lands in a neighborhood called Inglewood in the outskirts of Chicago. He gets employment at the E.S. Holton Drugstore, a family-owned pharmacy, owned by Mr. Everett Holton and his wife Claire. The store had been a successful business for years, but Mr. Holton had recently been diagnosed with cancer and was in desperate need of help to keep the store afloat. Holmes appeared to be the perfect candidate. He was outgoing, polite, and had experience working in pharmacies. Just 6 months later, Mr. Holton passes away.
Uh-huh.
Mrs. Holton jumped at the proposal to sell the store to Holmes when he offered to buy it. Little did she know, Holmes had experience swindling others and dodging payments. In 1887, after many attempts and even a lawsuit, Mrs. Holton took her kids and moved to California without ever receiving payment for the store.
Oh, that's so sad.
Though he now had a steady income, he could not stop his old ways. He continued running scams by buying and selling properties and goods under aliases. He would take out a loan, purchase property, then resell it. When creditors would try to collect on the loan, they would only discover that the original person never existed. And he did this often. His credit scams were his main moneymaker. He did this pretty continuously.
So he's just like a trash human all the way around.
Yeah.
A very charming trash human.
Yeah, aren't they all? This is actually pretty interesting. An example of his manipulation prowess was an elixir he sold at the pharmacy. Sold for years, the mineral water elixir claimed to maintain health and restore youthfulness. But it was nothing other than tap water. Literally
Sounds like
snake oil.
I feel like there's scams like that now. Like, wasn't
For
there
sure.
recently like some scam on television about it being like holy water or some cures cancer and stuff? I think one of my relatives actually gave me a bottle of it once, and I was like, cool, thanks. And I just threw it away.
It could have cured you of everything. You'd never be sick again.
My anxiety would be gone. What?
What? Yeah.
I'm anxiety free, just like that.
There's actually, I'll try and find it, but there's an old advertisement for this mineral water elixir.
Oh, so he was like full on advertising it and
Yes.
stuff.
Yes. Yeah, he was very well known and popular. So in 1888, Holmes decides to obtain a lease on the lot across the street from the pharmacy. At the southwest corner of 63rd and Wallace is the plot that would become Holmes' masterpiece of horror. Holmes was the sole architect of a 3-story building. He designed the blueprints and everything involved. The spectacle quickly grew in popularity throughout Inglewood. It was hard to miss the large, extravagant construction process. Helmed by the charming Dr. Holmes, the building gained the nickname The Castle from locals.
Is there a History Channel documentary on this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I have heard this right. Continue on.
No one actually knew the delicate dance Holmes choreographed to escape suspicion of the true nature of the building. Holmes made sure that he was the only one that knew the true layout of the building and the plans for its construction. Holmes ensured this by keeping a constant turnover of contractors and laborers. He used his conman experience to dodge payment for most of the work. He'd claimed a satisfactory work, and they'd never set foot on the property again. One notable example was a large vault Holmes had built. He had the vault built first, and then later had a room built around the vault. When creditors threatened to repossess the vault, Holmes confidently told them to go ahead and try, but if they damaged the surrounding room, he would sue them for everything they were worth. Through the constant rotation of workers, the grandiose of the castle remained unsoiled. Not a soul knew the true nature of what the mansion contained. When they talk about the constant turnover, he went through so many construction workers, again, because Chicago is still coming back from the Chicago fire of 71. There's tons of day laborers there, tradesmen there. Some of them only worked a day, and they were never paid for what they did. He went through construction companies. They would come in and build like quarter of a floor, like build some staircases, and he would claim that they had done a poor job and he was unhappy with it, and he'd fire them, and they were never ever paid.
I mean, that's smart. It's horrible, but it's smart.
Yeah, he was an intelligent man, and I think his intelligence shone through his conning. This man paid for very little in his life,
He
and
chose
he
to
had
use
a
that
lot.
intelligence for bad.
Yeah, he took the villain route.
Yeah, no kidding. Gosh, don't lock your kids in a closet with a skeleton, guys. I think that you can really mess them up.
Yeah. Once complete, the mansion was 3 floors and a basement. The first floor was set up as commercial properties, including a restaurant, jewelry store, barber shop, a blacksmithing shop, and a new pharmacy for Holmes to work in, since he had sold E.S. Holton Pharmacy that he had originally worked at.
Oh, the one that he didn't pay anything for.
Yeah, he sold it and got money from it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The third floor was a type of residence for Holmes, as well as office spaces. So it was kind of they call it a mansion. His living quarters were actually pretty meager. They were on the top floor, and it wasn't like it was a penthouse or
Kind of
anything
like an
that.
apartment.
A little bit like an apartment. Yeah. The other rooms on the top floor, like a different from it being like different apartments, it was more like office spaces. Like it was very thought out that he didn't want a lot of people around that area constantly. The second floor, however, was made up of 35 rooms made to look like regular bedrooms that were actually death chambers. Several rooms had double locks, peepholes, and gas valves hidden throughout them. They would allow Holmes to watch victims slowly asphyxiate to death. There were also false doors and staircases that led to nowhere, guaranteeing that no one could easily find their way out and would become lost, confused, and afraid. That second floor was kind of made to look like a hotel with just individual bedrooms, and he could lead people in, but without his guidance, they'd never be able to find their way out.
Sounds fun.
As horrifying as the second floor sounds, it barely holds a candle to the basement.
It gets worse?
It's always the basement. It's always the freaking basements.
Many later
note to
would
self.
call the basement a medieval dungeon. It housed a true reflection of Holmes' darkness with torture devices, lime pits, a crematorium, and dissection table.
I didn't realize there was a crematorium that he built. Like, I knew a little bit about this.
Gotta get rid of those bodies somehow.
All right, Sweeney Todd.
He even had a true medieval device called a rack. And the rack is kind of like what you see in movies where they hook people's arms up and then their legs to the bottom and they stretch them until all their joints dislocate.
Yuck.
Ew.
So he had one of those. When he was later asked about it, he said that he wanted it as a way to help create a race of giants. A lot of people don't believe what he said anyway, but
I don't think that's how that works.
Yeah.
it's not. And with Holmes being as smart as he was, I'm pretty sure he knew that.
I'm just gonna claim insanity at this point.
Holmes had thought about his plans ahead of time and had chutes built from the second floor to the basement for easy body disposal. During the construction of his mansion, Holmes continued his trips across the Midwest and his conman activities. In 1887, while in Minneapolis, he met Bertha Belknap. She was enticed by the known ladies' man. He wrote to her describing a life of elegance and decadence that sounded nothing less than royalty. Only a few short weeks later, Myrta moved into the mansion in Chicago with her new husband, Holmes. Little did she know, Holmes was still legally married to his first wife, Clara. Myrta quickly learned her new life was nothing like she was promised. Myrta was running the new pharmacy with Holmes, who was increasingly absent, spending his time conning for more money and overlooking the construction on the rest of the mansion. She was kept on a tight leash because Holmes controlled all the finances. 2 years into their marriage, Myrta gave birth to their daughter Lucy. Being overworked with parenting and running the pharmacy, she began to complain to Holmes. So he no longer left her in charge of the store, making her instead in charge of the books, meaning that she was hidden away in the mansion more and was even less of an inconvenience. However, this meant for Holmes that he was back spending time at the pharmacy instead of managing his scams and frauds.
And death chambers.
In 1889, another person comes into Holmes' circle to fill a vacancy. Benjamin Peitzel was a married man with 5 children who was down on his luck, an alcoholic struggling to support his family. He found his way to Chicago's neighborhood of Inglewood, which was in desperate need of construction workers and laborers. Funny enough.
Weird.
Peitzel met Holmes while working on the mansion and became one of his few long-term workers. Holmes and Peitzel struck up a strange friendship. Peitzel became Holmes' right-hand man and partner in crime, literally. Peitzel had experience in petty crime and theft, and his desperation made him easy to control. Peitzel helped Holmes commit his frauds and was put in charge of overseeing the construction on the mansion while Holmes was away.
He was like a willing participant then.
Yes, yeah, he knew all of what Holmes was doing. So he knew about the construction of the mansion. He knew about the credit scams because he ended up helping him with it.
But I don't think this is going to help his alcoholism.
Holmes became even heavily involved in the Peitzel's family. He became their benefactor, helping with finances and making sure Peitzel always had work. Holmes actually spoke well of the children and enjoyed the company of Peitzel and his wife, Carrie. Not only did Benjamin Peitzel spend a lot of time working with Holmes and knew what Holmes was up to, he brought this man around his wife and children. Holmes has written that he thought the children were well-mannered and he liked being around them.
God.
By 1890, Holmes was able to circle back to his true passion, and his mansion had its first victim, becoming what would be known as the murder mansion. Around this time, Holmes was engaged in an affair with a woman named Julia Connor. She originally worked as his assistant, but he convinced her to leave her husband, who was employed by Holmes at the time working on the mansion, and move into his mansion with her daughter. So, hey, leave your husband and come live this fanciful life with me in my mansion with you and your daughter.
Yeah, and my wife and my child, and this alcoholic guy who brings his kids around too.
But a lot of people actually didn't know Myrta and Robert were still there because they were pretty much locked away on the top floor. Oh, I even have a note in here. Look at this. This was at the same time frame Myrta and Lucy were also living in the mansion. Sorry, Robert was his son with his first wife.
Okay.
Lucy was the daughter with the second one. And it is believed that they never knew about each other. That Julia never knew about Myrta.
So did he just like lock her away? Like, did she just not go out ever?
It sounds like he was controlling in the way that like Myrta stayed on the third floor, stayed in the residence.
Well, if he was abusive towards his first wife, I'm sure he was abusive towards his second wife, and that probably also played into control.
And there's speculation as well that Holmes stayed charming up until he didn't need to anymore. So once you were quote unquote married and you lived in his mansion, like he stopped being the Holmes that they recognized.
Isn't that usually how it happens?
Yes. So Myrta with their daughter Lucy and Julia with her daughter Pearl were now both living in this mansion. Didn't know about each other, were both quote-unquote married to Holmes. When Julia and Pearl moved in, they were not married. So Holmes convinced her to leave the husband and move in with the promise of marriage. But like when they actually moved into the mansion, they didn't like immediately get married. Holmes orchestrated this by manipulating Julia. He limited their actions and regulated their movements inside the mansion. I mean, he had built this place so people would have a hard time navigating it without him anyway.
What a psychopath.
Julia, however, was never suspicious. She believed that they were in love and felt safe within the mansion. He was careful around her, never letting his true personality come out, and he enjoyed the power of control he felt with her. After a few months of living in the mansion, Julia discovered she was pregnant with Holmes' child. She demanded they get married because she didn't want a child out of wedlock. Holmes agreed to get married and give Julia the life of leisure she deserved. However, she must agree to have an abortion, which Holmes would perform himself.
Oh, no.
Julia agreed to the arrangement.
No.
Holmes led Julia down to the basement to a fake medical lab setup. Later, Holmes would say that Julia did not survive the abortion due to complications. He took this opportunity to dissect her body and then in turn cleaned the skeleton. A local college reportedly bought a female skeleton from Holmes shortly after for a sum of money, and Julia's daughter Pearl was never seen again.
I was going to ask what happened to her child.
They don't know.
He killed her.
It's assumed, but her body was never found. She was never seen of again. Through this, Holmes had stumbled across a way to fulfill his fantasies and make his money. Holmes' next known victim was a furnace designer, Wade Warner. He was in charge of installing a heating system in the mansion, and Holmes had no intention of paying, but Warner was insistent. Holmes had Warner come into the basement to inspect some supposed faulty equipment. Holmes then locked Warner in the furnace, turned it on to its full extent, and waited for Warner to burn to death. It stated that the heat was so intense that not even the bones remained.
Holy jeez.
That has to be... That's got to be very, 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 very high heat.
Yeah, so this furnace, I believe, is kind of what I've found is what the crematorium was.
Wow.
We are only barely scratching the surface.
Oh, God, no.
In 1892, Holmes took a new assistant named Emmeline Segrand, whom was also his new mistress.
Of course.
However, he quickly grew tired of her, and one day sent her to retrieve some documents from the vault. But once she was inside, he locked and sealed her in. Segrand suffocated to death, and shortly after, the University of Chicago bought a female skeleton from Holmes.
Why does he keep selling skeletons? Part of his scamming?
Yeah, he could get away with murder that way. The bodies were gone.
God, what a psycho.
He'd dissect them, clean the bones, and then sell them for anatomy reasons.
So that very thing that's terrified him, he's now selling
Obsessed
to the
with?
world. Yeah.
Yeah. Throughout this time, Myrta was still living in the mansion.
That's surprising.
And she was still working for Holmes, but it became clear that Holmes was no longer interested in her and their family and was taking advantage of her work. She also started to have suspicions that he was having affairs.
Wow,
Imagine that.
Didn't take very long for her to think that at all.
Yeah.
A little late to the game there.
Just a bit. So Myrta took Lucy and moved back to Minnesota. Alive.
She
probably.
actually got out of there alive?
Yes.
That's a freaking miracle.
So Clara and Robert, his first wife and son, and his second, Myrta, and their daughter, Lucy, lived. One of them became a teacher or something like that. Like, they continued on to have full lives.
Because they escaped the Mansion of Doom?
Yeah, no kidding. When Myrta took Lucy and left, Holmes didn't seem particularly upset, but the couple was never officially divorced.
Were they ever really officially married if he was already married, though?
Yes, because he was married under a different name. He
Oh,
married
okay.
Clara under Mudgett, and then married Myrta under Holmes. So he had two marriages, two official marriages that he was never divorced from.
Okay. And then his marriages of death. Okay.
And even after they left, Holmes' day-to-day life never really changed. By 1893, Holmes had his next mistress, a Minnie Williams.
I'm sorry. Pause. How? I mean, he must have been something, because that's a lot of mistresses that he's already had and murdered and sold.
Yeah, I think one of my big takeaways from all the research and stuff that I've done is that Holmes' real skill, he was obviously a psychopath, sociopath, you know, all of the above. But his real skill was in manipulation. He could get
nice.
anybody to do whatever he wanted.
I had to look up his picture because I was like,
He was also
I
a
know.
successful
I know.
businessman and doctor to these women.
I just think that he also, like, if you carry that title as a doctor back then, that's
true.
Even now, that's a big thing. So that is a life of like,
a stable life too.
And
Yeah.
extravagant.
Not having to ask for anything.
Yeah, he had a mansion, a quote-unquote mansion built. He was extremely successful in the eyes of the public. So Minnie Williams, he learned that Minnie Williams was a beneficiary of a property in Texas, and he was eager to obtain that property.
Of course he was.
Williams worked as Holmes' private secretary before he got her to move into the mansion and make their relationship more personal. Shortly after, mostly with the promise of marriage, Williams signed away her rights to the property. And it sounds like Minnie has a sister here that comes up in a second, but it sounds like both of them were orphaned as well. So they were the beneficiaries of this property, or she was, and there was nobody to, like, it was just her and her sister.
So nobody could question anything.
Yeah. Her sister, which I've seen her name as something different a couple different times, which is, this happened a long time ago and records are always a little fishy, but more consistently I see her called Nanny. So Minnie's sister Nanny came to visit them for a while at the mansion, and it's believed that both Minnie and Nanny were suffocated to death in Holmes' vault and were never seen of again.
Oh my gosh.
He didn't sell their skulls to...
No, but he then sold the property that he had obtained from Minnie.
Okay.
What the heck?
He didn't stop there, though. Soon after, Holmes was in Denver, Colorado, working on yet another con under the alias Henry Mansfield Howard. Here, he met Georgiana Yoke, and again spun a tale of a fabulous life he could provide her in Chicago. They were married, and she followed Holmes, who she still knew under his alias as Howard, back to his mansion. We're only like halfway through, by the way.
Wait, pause 1 second. Let's recap. How many people is this that he's killed so far that we know of?
So, supposed. So there's the very first boy that went missing.
Okay.
There's the young man from the pharmacy that received the medication.
Mm-hmm.
There is...
The husband, right? Of the pharmacy owner. Probably.
Yeah, Mr. Holton.
Mm-hmm.
There's Julia Connor and her daughter Pearl.
So sad.
And then there is Wade Warner. And there is Emmeline Sigrand. And then Minnie and Nanny.
So 9 so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're only like halfway through, guys. There's more.
Oh, boy.
This guy is... I knew a little bit. I've read about him before, but I didn't realize the extent.
Just how awful he was?
Well, yeah, I didn't know about a lot of the previous stuff, and I didn't realize the extent he went to.
The ego.
Yeah, like he's a true narcissist.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yes. Oh, yes.
Well, and obviously people are just things that he can... If they don't have anything to give him, then they serve no purpose, really.
and how smart, God, I hate to even say it, how smart it was that he hired and fired people so quickly with that mansion, because nobody was going to know. There's not a single person out there that's going to know the blueprint of that place but him and maybe his accomplice.
Peitzel did.
But like, people were never going to know his plan ever.
Yes.
It's scary.
Yes.
Thank you for listening. Additional information for each case can be found on our website, truthliesandalibis.buzzsprout.com. New episodes will be uploaded every Monday. Find us on Instagram and Facebook at Truth, Lies, and Alibis.